So my name's Richard Simcott, and it's great to be here today to mix with you all in a social context. Something that at the Polyglot conference... Are you pointing to God? Oh, you can't hear me? Oh, okay. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Is that better? Okay, brilliant. So, first of all, I'm really grateful to Judith and the team that put this together, because the difference between this Polyglot gathering and the Polyglot conference that we had last year is that we've got a lot more time together to mingle and to mix and to ask questions and to meet each other and practice our languages. And I think that's really important for the community. And when I was asked about coming and talking about languages and what topic I would choose or would be interesting for people, the idea of maintaining multiple languages is one that I get asked quite a lot online. Now, my initial diagram was this, of a sort of a crazy chart of of lots of factors that I think are important in maintaining languages and considerations for language learning and how it's possible to maintain multiple languages. The thing is that the question is not very easy to answer, and the reason is because none of us are the same. We're all different, and our backgrounds are different, and our situations are different. And I noticed that there has already been a talk today as well about juggling languages, and I think that definitely maintaining multiple languages is, in essence, juggling languages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few thoughts and ideas now of factors in my own life, my own situation, as to how I manage the languages I have, what I think is important, and also the levels that I think are important to maintain and why. And then I'll want to really field the room for questions to ask anything on topic. It can be something else that you want to ask me as well, just so that it gives an opportunity for a longer Q&A session. So, as a lot of you know, I'm originally from the United Kingdom, and English is an international language, so losing my English isn't really an option. That's the first language that I had, and I don't think I'm going to lose it very easily. Not that I'm trying to. But then, when you start learning languages, who here has 5 or more languages? Yeah, there's not many rooms you're going to ask that and get that response. Who here has 10 or more languages? Okay. Now, I want to come back to you guys later, because 10 for me is a critical number. And the reason is that you start learning languages normally. For a lot of us, when you're at school, you have a school language, or you have parents that speak another language, and you can carry those on quite easily because they're either your first languages or just another language that you come into contact with for either work, or you can have a hobby where you read things and you have a motivation to keep that language, and you go on holiday maybe to the country. It's all well and good, and a lot of people manage that and live like that quite nicely. When you get more up to 5 languages, if you've got similar languages, that's also normally a lot easier because you've got the cognates, so you don't forget words so easily. But what if you're learning languages as different as Swahili and Korean and Japanese and then French and then Navajo? Well, that's a language choice that you make. And if you make that choice, keeping them up, you have to fit your life around that choice and the choices you make. And that's something that I think is the key to the central message of what I want to say today, is that maintaining multiple languages is a life choice. It's not something you do. You don't learn languages and then say, okay, so now what do I do? You have to shape your life and mold your life around your choices for languages. And when I come back to the guys that have got 10 or more, the reason is that time then impinges on what you can do. Now, how many people here are in their 20s or younger? Quite a lot of you guys, yeah? Now, I don't know how many of you have got married and had children and work full-time jobs, but anybody here who has got that, put your hands up. Do you all notice as well that before you start the day, it's over? Is it me? And you think back to the 20s as this wonderful time when you had lots of time, but you didn't really do that much with it? I know I feel like that. I can't believe that I take my daughter to school and then before I know it, I'm going to bed again. And that's where there's a breaking point in language learning, because you have responsibilities and you have other things you have to do. You have work commitments, you have family commitments, you have places you need to be, you have things you need to do. And this is really the crux of what it comes down to. Where do you fit in your language learning? And where do you fit it in when it gets past the 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 languages? How do you keep them all up? What level do you need them to? So there are questions that I put to myself when I go through this process. One of them is, why am I learning the language? So that's the first thing I will think to myself. Why am I learning it, and where can I use it? How can I use it? And what's the point of me doing it? Am I going to get what I want in return? Is it something that, I'm doing just because I think it sounds cool? Because I often find, and I don't know about your experience with this, but my experience is finding something cool doesn't cut it. No. Yeah, it sounds cool to learn Swahili. The reality, it's one of the questions that I get very often as well. Why don't you learn Korean? Why don't you learn Tagalog? Why don't you learn Swahili? Why don't you challenge yourself properly instead of learning all these joke European languages, and just learn something hard like Zulu or Xhosa? I can't even pronounce it. But but the reality is, I have lots and lots of things that I do in my life, and where on earth am I going to use Zulu or Xhosa or any of these languages, which I think are completely valuable, if you have a life that fits around those languages? And I think really in this room, it isn't a discussion about whether you learn a language or whether you learn another language or whether you learn a 10th language. It's whether you learn a 10th language with a valid reason, and whether you learn a 10th language to a level that you can legitimately keep up. How many of you have had a high level in a language and it's gone down? Okay. If no one's got their hands up, they're all liars. I mean, seriously. The languages get rusty. If you don't use them, they get rusty. You hear of people saying, especially many of the hyper-polyglots, you hear people saying, I've studied X amount of languages. Some people say 50 or however many they studied. And then they say, but if I go back to the country for a week or two, it'll all come back to me. Well, it might do, but really, can you do that all the time for all 50 languages? The answer's probably not. The only examples I've seen where people say they speak 60 to up to 100 languages are dead. And I am not going to call out on Mezzofonte or anyone, respect to the guy, but at the same time, how? How do you keep up 60 languages legitimately within, just do the maths with how many hours you've got in a day. How many of us here sleep? Okay. How many of us here go to the toilet? From the smell in the room, I can see some of you bathe every now and again. Is that right? Yeah. So I mean, seriously, you've got to live. You've got to have, as we say in Macedonian, you've got to have bread on the table to eat. You can't just exist. Languages are great, and as Ellen quite eloquently said yesterday, languages are a great tool. And I think that's what it comes down to. They're a great tool. They're a great tool to make a living. They're a great tool to survive. They're a great tool to communicate. They're a great tool to have these kinds of interactions that we're having now. But reality does have to come into it. So, what I would say is, when you're choosing your languages, or when I choose my languages, I choose them in, I would hope to think, a smart way. I choose languages that I see as relevant to my life. So, after French, I did Spanish at school because it was an option. I had a Spanish native teacher, and I could use it. I learnt Welsh because I'm from that part of the UK, where I go back home and I speak Welsh and English. And I learnt sign language when I lived back there once because I had the deaf community round the corner from me. I was coming into contact with deaf people, so I was using British Sign Language. I learnt Swedish because it was on offer at university. I actually only wanted to do it because I wanted to study Icelandic. And I couldn't do it without doing Swedish. But I carried on with it as well. And Swedish is a language I thought that I was never ever going to use again. But then here I am, how many X years later, studying at university on a Swedish university online and doing some modules in Swedish. And these are things that sometimes you're surprised with a language. You'll choose a language and you'll think you'll take it to an intermediate level and that'll be it. And it will surprise you and other opportunities will come up and you'll be able to make a path using that knowledge and improving it and getting better. Other times you just have to content yourself with, I'm going to be a good tourist and speak the language in a restaurant. That's me with Greek. Greek and I are kind of friends, but we've not been all the way. I mean, you know, she's flirted with me quite a number of times, I have to admit, and I keep going back to it. Who here has been to a language, or had a language book, and they've been back to it like a number of times because they've forgotten everything they've learned and then gone back and back and back and back and back and back? Yeah. Okay, you're all human, that's good. And that's exactly what happens to me too. So, you know, being labelled a polyglot or hyperpolyglot or these kinds of labels, they mean very little. It's actually the interest in languages and what you learn and why you're learning them and keeping them up and doing it for yourself. You don't get anything in particular just for speaking lots and lots of languages. Yeah, people may come up to you and say, you know, pat on the back, well done. But, you know, you get that at theatre as well, be an actor. But you do it for a reason because you need them. So it all comes down to that. And so what I want to do now is just hand over to you guys to ask questions about things that and get experience really from you about, you know, what your feelings have been in this process and where you think, you know, juggling a number of languages is easy or hard. I'd like to start with the people who have got 10 or more languages, just because I know the issues with logistically keeping that up in your life. With the internet, it's a lot easier than it was before, but it's still a challenge. So who's got 10 or more? Okay. I'll start here because it's easier for me. No, just I want to know what your experience has been for keeping up your languages. How do you find it? Do you find it, you have attrition? Do you find it easy to do? Are there any languages that are particularly difficult?
That's pretty difficult to me because some languages I simply don't know anyone who is able to speak to. So I study Romanian and I like the language and I listen to Romanian music, but I don't have any Romanian friend. And I keep forgetting Romanian because I just don't speak it. And speaking a language is one of the skills that I use the most. I like to speak the language. So it's pretty difficult to me, and I studied Brazilian Sign Language too, but I don't have any deaf friend. And I don't live near any deaf community, but I want to be able to communicate with deaf people when it's needed to. So it's pretty difficult to me in general.
Yeah, so exactly. That's one of the things, and I think in this community particularly, we're all guilty of going after that sort of shiny object that looks cool and is actually particularly difficult to maintain. And not necessarily helpful for what we're doing in terms of our lives. And I do it myself, and it's a good thing to do in itself because you learn something new. But then the reality and the disappointment that you feel, and we all feel it because we all lose languages to a degree, is, oh, you know, why can't I just retain it all? Well, because you've got a million and one other things going on in your head, and it is probably still there. It's just that you can't be everywhere. You can't not sleep. You have to sleep. I mean, as I say, there are languages. Let me, from my example of you were saying about Romanian, I had this with Romanian Catalan. When I learnt Catalan, my Romanian just went, and I don't know why, but I just found it very difficult to maintain both languages at a decent level. Catalan, I find now, stays in my head more, and I think it's because of Spanish, because I speak Spanish at home. So languages that are similar, because they sound similar and you remember the differences, I think sometimes that makes it easier to retain them. But then you have to content yourself with thinking, I'm not going to be perfect in this 100% of the time. But you've got it to be able to work on if you need it. Any other examples of languages that you've learnt? 10 or more? Judith. Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, I can also emphasize. I at one point did the whole Asimil course for Swahili and also started reading websites and stuff. So I was a pretty good level, but now it's barely present because I didn't find a way to integrate it into my life. On the other hand, I don't have this problem with languages that I mostly read. See, I'm very introverted, so I don't generally speak the languages much, and it always takes me a bit time to get going. But I find that even if if I read say one book a month in a language, it never leaves me, and that is much more doable than finding the hours to speak it, to keep it alive on a speaking level. I think that passive knowledge is much easier to keep alive than any other knowledge. But I actually had a question for you earlier already, because you said that you only make sensible decisions in choosing languages to learn. And I realized your last two projects, correct me if I'm wrong, were Tokipona and Ladin.
As I say, only sensible decisions, and I stand by that statement. I mean, Ladino is a completely useful language in my situation because I use it never. Tokipona, for obvious reasons, is fantastic. So these are examples of languages. Thank you for bringing that up, Judith. These are examples of languages where I say they're fun to do, and I don't think. What I would never say is, I would never say to people, don't learn a language because it's a shiny object in the distance. Go for it, do it. Get the experience, grow from the experience, but don't be disappointed if you're not able to then keep it up to the same level as your better languages. I mean, you know, living in a country or using a language as a home language has a huge impact on your ability to communicate, ability to use a language with native speakers, and the vocabulary, the depth of vocabulary particularly, that you acquire over years and 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 years of practice. Macedonian, I've been speaking at home for 10 years, and I think I speak the language fairly well. You know, when I speak to people, nobody has this like, oh my God, what the hell are you speaking reaction. They understand everything I say. We communicate in a normal way. And it's a language that until I was 27, I'd never even looked at. So you can pick up a language like that, like a small language, not know where you're going with it, but life changes. You get married. You have a kid that speaks it. You have a whole family then in the country, and you use it. So from being something that's fun to do for a girlfriend, it all of a sudden becomes a more serious thing. I went to Germany after I don't know if anybody of you know this, but I didn't speak German until I was 22. It was a language that I wanted to study at school, and we couldn't do it. And my mum wrote in a letter to ask if I could do German because I really wanted to do it, and they still didn't let me do it. So I had to wait, because at university, the university courses rarely offer in the UK ab initio German. So I had to wait till after I'd finished my degree to really go over and study it properly, because I had other things that I was studying. And I went to Germany and I learnt the language, and German has become one of the most important languages that I use now. More so than Portuguese, for example, which was part of my degree course. But I have not one certificate or diploma in the German language. None. And I always imagined when I was younger that getting these certificates, getting the qualifications was the most important thing. And actually it's not, it's the knowledge. And it's the knowledge and it's the awareness of what you know and what's realistic. And getting to use things in work and getting to use things at home really has been the key for me to keeping up languages. My home environment is in 5 languages. Outside the house I speak another 3 regularly. I travel to other neighbouring countries. So home languages are English, French, Macedonian, German, Spanish. I speak to my wife in Macedonian. I speak to my daughter in French, German, Spanish, and we do our homework in English. Our homework. It's like I finished first grade. And that helps to, in my mind as well, to keep things ticking over, as well as work things as well. Studying at Swedish University, Swedish, studying the other languages that I study, Chinese, Russian and Arabic this semester, helps to keep my hand in. I speak Turkish and Albanian fairly regularly outside of the house. Speak Serbian, Croatian, hear them very often as well. Bulgarian too, because we go to Bulgaria quite a lot, and Greek, as I say, tourist holiday Greek. But still, it counts. And then other languages I use for work, because I interview a lot of great people, and I get to use them in those kinds of contexts, and to also look at text. And like Judith says exactly, is if you have text and you have media available, you can keep up a lot more languages now, I think, than you could in the past. But it is definitely an effort, and it's a moulding of your life. What I want to do is, I think that really this topic is done to death. I think a lot of us have heard videos on this, and there's been one presentation already. But what I want to do is ask questions that are important to you. From my experience, if I can share something that's useful, if you've got anything you think it could be something slightly different off from centre, I'm happy for any questions, just to open this up.
Thanks. I was just interested in what you were saying about speaking several languages with your daughter, and how that works, whether you speak one before lunch and one after lunch, and how this has come to be, how she reacts to it, and so on.
I'll give you a history. So, some of you may know the story already. So, my daughter was born in the United Kingdom. From birth, I spoke to her in French and English. And I would sing nursery rhymes in both languages, one after the other. So I'd sing, let's give you an example. So, twinkle, twinkle, little star in English. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And then in French, quand trois poules vont au champ, la première va devant. The same sort of sounds, different words, different meanings. But the idea is that she hears the sort of the baby type of speak and the songs that you would sing in a normal situation. By the time she got to 1, and she started going to some play groups in English, I switched to just French at home. And English, she would speak with, well, she'd have contact with my family outside, my mum and etc., and also in these groups with other children that spoke English. And I carried on with French. My wife spoke Macedonian, I spoke Macedonian. And the really weird thing is my daughter could say 3 words in each of the 3 languages that she had as a mother tongue. By the age she was about 1, I'd say. Then something strange happened. She started speaking to me only in Macedonian, bearing in mind we were living in the UK. Not only that, she went a step further. I'd go to my mum's house with my daughter. We were all there, everyone speaking English, including me, and my daughter would translate what my mum said to me into Macedonian so that I understood. I don't know whether that's all the girls in Daddy's life speak to him in Macedonian or what it was, but she'd hear me reply in English, she'd hear my mum speak in English, but she would always translate till the age of 3, and then one day she stopped. And she switched to speak English or French. And I never got really bothered which one. It didn't worry me at all. Because at that point she started French kindergarten anyway. And she was having all her education in French. But before that, I have to roll back a little bit. To 16 months old, because she was doing so well with the first 3 languages, we decided to introduce German and Spanish. We were having a debate at home. Which one? Oh, let's try both and see what she likes. So what I'd do is take her out for an hour a day to a play centre to play in those languages. We'd get there and I would not speak English or French. I would just speak Spanish for an hour or just speak German for an hour. And we'd play. I'd do things like, look at the bottle. I'm going to put it on the table. Can you get me the ball over there? Or can you get me this? Things that she could tangibly attach the words to that made sense to as a young child, a toddler. And what surprised me was within about 2 months, she started preferring words in the 2 new languages. So she started using the word for flower in German, which just really surprised me because I'd not expected that at all. The reason we did this, we were not completely crazy, no. We weren't trying to create a new Wendy Vo. We were basically just trying to use some research that we'd seen in the States from some linguists out there who exposed children to an hour a day of language. And what they did is they took American children and they exposed them to Spanish. There were lots of other experiments with different languages as well around the world, but the one that stuck in my head is the one with Spanish. So what they would do is they tried it in different ways. You know, one group of children would just listen to Spanish on the radio, just the audio. The others would watch it on TV with someone speaking. The others would have interaction, and the other group would have nothing at all. At the end of the experiment, only the children who had interaction with a real person, proper playtime in the language, could understand the language at the end of the year, the end of the experiment. And this is what we based our idea on. And it worked. And to this day, we still follow that model. So now she's at school, so again, your life and your commitments have to fit around things. So we do things in French at home. Now she's studying in English. She's switched to the English system. But we speak French at home now, and then we still do the Spanish. And I'm flexible on the hour. I'll sometimes just go down to half an hour because of time constraints. But the idea is she keeps it in her head, and that she understands the language, and she does. She understands. There are a couple of people in the room who have met my daughter, and they've seen how she reacts and how she responds in the languages. But one thing I say is I don't like pressure, so I wouldn't never pressure her to go through sort of speaking all the time. If she finds it easier to speak in English, if she's tired, I'll just continue speaking, and she's at least understanding it and keeping it in her head. Does that answer your question? In a long way. Any other questions?
How old is she?
7.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to ask a question, like, how do you retain languages that are similar? So I have a problem like with Ukrainian Polish. They're all mixed up together in my head, and I cannot speak one of them without putting the other words from the other language together. So
Common issue. And it's not one that I'm immune to. I think that common languages is languages that are similar, from the same family, sound similar with shared vocabulary, sometimes differences, false friends. It can be quite tricky. I know that now if I try and speak in Czech, even though Czech was my first Slavic language, I want to speak in Polish. and it's purely because I've concentrated so much on it. It needs to get to a situation, I think, and this is what it is. It's to do with practice. I firmly believe it's to do with practice, and using both of them in the same types of situations or at the same time, if possible, and using them as much as possible and trying to switch as much as possible and bearing with all the mistakes that you make doing it. The way I trained this for 8 of my languages, I used to work in eight languages on a daily basis. I would answer the phone, and the phone, this is after university, would say Italy, and I'd have to pick up the phone and I'd have to speak in Italian. Say buongiorno, and then every now and again I'd get a region of a country where it wasn't that language. So I'd pick up and say Italy, go buongiorno, go ja grüß Gott. I was like, oh my God. And then you have to switch straight away into German. Or it could ring, the phone could ring in. At the time I was working in, so for one job I worked in French, Spanish, German, Italian, Portuguese, Swedish. I took Danish calls as well. My Danish was terrible at the time. It's still not great. And then for another job, I also added in English every now and again. But normally it was those languages that I would use. My boss was Dutch in one of the companies, so most of my meetings were in Dutch. And then I worked on a German team, so my default language would be German. But yeah, I found that in the beginning it was very difficult to do that, the separation of languages. But having done that for about 2 years, that really sorted that out for me in terms of being able to decompartmentalize the languages. And for similar languages, I'm going to have to do something like this. I've got to go through this pain barrier myself with Czech and Polish, because I'm not going to let it become Czecholish. I want it but it was one of the things that I always said to myself when I moved to the Balkans. I'm not going to learn Bulgarian because I found too many Slavic languages too similar. But when my Macedonian got to a point where it is now, I just thought, no, it doesn't matter. I can handle it now. But when one is really, really strong, it's a lot easier to go to the next one. I found with Czech, I spent too long away from the Czech Republic to then go back and do Polish. as if I was still at my C1, C2 level in Czech. So, but it does come back. Like people say when they say languages come back, it does come back. I spent a month in the Czech Republic 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, and my Czech was, I joined a B2 group in Czech for a conversation class, and it was completely fine. So yeah, practice. Any other questions? Do you mind if I go here first, because it's less... Oh. You can come to me, do some work.
Do you accept a question in Spanish or other languages? Yes? No, quería saber sobre, hablando de niños multilingües, que hablan varias lenguas, ¿conoces estudios o experiencias, quizá, sobre el límite máximo que se conoce del número de lenguas que un niño haya aprendido sin confundirse, o lo que los expertos aconsejan, o no sé, eso?
Gracias. ¿Puedo responder en español o en inglés? En español, vale. Pues hablo en español, I'll speak in Spanish, y luego hablo en inglés, and then I'll answer in English. Había un experto en una conferencia cuando estaba en Italia, hace no sé cuántos años, y me decía que no hay límite. Entonces, yo digo que el tiempo sí que es un límite, porque solo tienes 24 horas en el día, ¿no? Y es la misma cosa como estaba hablando de lo que pasa conmigo, con varias personas aquí, que no se puede mantener 25, 20, no sé tantas lenguas así, cada día, porque no tienes tiempo durante el día. Tienes que trabajar, tienes que dormir, tienes que comer, tienes que hacer todas las cosas normales, ¿no?, en la vida. Y para niños es igual, porque tienen también que ir a la escuela. Entonces yo creo que sí, hasta 5 para mí está bien, pero yo no soy experto. Pero digo que para mí 5 es algo más normal y más real como idea, ¿no?
¿Y no conoces o experiencias de niños que sepan,
de hecho,
10 lenguas?
No, de hecho no. Hay Wendy Vo, por ejemplo, se puede ver en YouTube, y ha aprendido no sé cuántos idiomas, pero más que 8 me parece. Pero ella también estudia en casa, entonces tienen profesores que van a su casa para hablar con ella cada día, y así que sería más fácil, pero esa es una situación muy específica, no se puede decir que eso sea una situación normal para todo el mundo, ¿no? So, just in English to say that again. What I was saying is, I don't believe there are limits. I don't know of any studies, but I think that it's the same issue that we've got as adults, keeping a number of languages. Children have to learn other things. They have to go to school. They've got other subjects that they need to learn as well. It's not just languages. I mean, we're all absolutely mad about languages, but you know, a child needs to learn everything else. But I think that around 5 is for me personally, I think that's a good maximum. Could be more, could be less, but I don't know of any official maximum or any studies where they've seen it go wrong drastically above that number. I mean, we've got countries in Europe where speaking 4 or 5 languages is the norm. You know, Luxembourg it's got Luxembourgish, which they have, I believe, in kindergarten, and then they have German or French, whichever way around it goes, with junior school, high school, and then they tend to speak very good English. They speak English at school, but then you've also got the largest number of Portuguese immigrants anywhere else in Europe in that country. So you've got a home language maybe of Portuguese. There are a lot of Serbs also that moved out there, so they may speak Serbian at home too. So that takes their total to 5 before they start studying languages. So I'm going to say 5. Final answer.
When I teach writing classes, one of the things that strikes me about people's relationship to language is that there are all kinds of things that make them good at writing. For example, maybe they have an aptitude for grammar or a flair for wording that's more intuitive, or very strong analytical skills that enable them to structure things very well. And I've I think about language learning in a similar way, but perhaps not as in as quite a sophisticated way yet, because I haven't been considering it as long. But the ability that some people bring to just replicate accents so easily versus the ability to take grammatical concepts and apply them quickly without a lot of effort in their speech and their writing, or the personality aspect that enables people to take risks and just start talking faster than other people so that they can learn more quickly. I suppose the ideal is the confluence of all things in one person, which seems to me to be kind of what you are, Richard. But anyway, I'm just wondering if you think of these as separate facilities, whether you've observed that. I mean, you're dealing with people who have languages all the time. Do you think of these as often separate skills, or are they more fused in your mind?
It's a big question.
I want you to solve all my problems.
Okay. I'll do my best. So in my experience, language skills vary immensely. I'd even go further than just talking about accents and those kinds of skills. I'd say translation is a completely separate skill. Interpreting is a completely separate skill. Just because you speak a language really well does not mean you're going to be a natural translator or someone who localizes languages into another culture. Definitely had lots of experiences of that. People who don't speak the language that well, when you hear them orally, may be absolutely amazing at composing things or translating into another language. With the accent, I think that there's got to be something to do with the musical ear. Some people sing well, some people don't. Some people naturally are able to imitate an accent, some don't. But for both skills, you can have training, coaching, some sort of teaching in place to help you improve on what you've got. And I think that's what it comes down to. As a child, I used to just enjoy imitating accents and doing it in my own language and then in other languages too. So I've always played with it. I think there's also a psychological element to it, that people feel very conscious of themselves when they're speaking a language and they're putting on an accent, as they say. So they try and say it in their normal voice with the words and the grammar of the language. And they feel that if they try and put it on, that they're almost mocking the native speakers. And they feel conscious about that. And I have met people who have admitted that to me. And they say, but if I do it, and they'll think I'm laughing at them. So I just do it in my normal voice. But actually, that's part and parcel of the language, to try to emulate the accent as much as you can. It's not the end of the world if you can't do it, because comprehension and clarity of speech in the oral form of the language is the most important thing. If people know what you're saying, does it matter? If I speak to you with a German accent, you can understand me, you can perfectly well if I speak with a German accent in English. It's not a problem. The only problem is that you have different perceptions of me as a person. Is that right? O si hablo español así también. Que claro. O si hablo español con acento francés, ¿eh? Yeah. And these are things that I used to do all the time at university. Yeah, I used to like the Finnish accent the best. The Finnish accent. Okay. I don't speak Finnish, but I do a good Finnish accent in other languages. So in English, Finnish people, they speak like this. And then cuando hablan español, tienen un acento muy fuerte. Sorry, I'm a complete fool. Okay, any other questions?
Hungarian. It's not a repertoire.
Okay, this question is kind of staying on the same topic of phonetics. And when you learn multiple languages, of course, you get more and more new sounds. So, for example, there's the famous Dutch ch that people have had to learn. How do you approach learning these new sounds? And is this an intuitive approach that you use like when you're imitating the accent, which is also something I enjoy doing? Or is it also an analytical approach that you try and find out how do I make this position in my tongue if I'm trying to pronounce the soft sound in Russian and I'm trying to do the R and the soft sign behind it. How do I figure that out? How do you do that?
That is a good question. Sorry. What I do, I think probably one of the funniest examples is probably the Czech sh, which is not natural even for a lot of Czechs. And saying it in a sentence is particularly demanding because you can say a sound in its own way and you can reproduce it maybe on the spot. If you got someone in front of you, you go, okay, so where's your tongue? Where are your teeth? Okay, where is it? Okay, let's listen. And then you find a victim that will be willing to listen to you, murder their language and murder the sounds of their languages for hours and hours. And let's say that you find that poor individual, like I've done on many occasions. They're no longer my friends. It wasn't my choice. They said to me, it's you, it's not me. But I do find that, the r sound, you learn, if anyone's here, who studied Czech? Or who speaks Czech? So you go the and then you lose your breath. You can no longer do it. But then you actually use it in real situations, but it took practice. It didn't just come overnight. To me, it sounded a bit similar to the r in Welsh. This, Rhyl. Rhyl is a name of a town in Wales. So it's getting closer to that, so that helped me to keep that in my mind. It's that with a slight tweak. The same with the sh and sh, and all of these very subtle differences in the sounds. I think of the one that's similar to it, and then try and get it to the next one, and then get the native speakers to tell me how bad I am. Any other?
I don't really have a question. I just want to share with you my experience about keeping languages, because I invested a lot of time, a lot of energy. Since I don't have talent, I had to learn the languages, and in order to keep them as a full-time traveling family father, I have pretty often the opportunity to practice the languages I have learned. So whenever I see an Italian coming, then I see just a gift coming towards me, and I only have to unwrap it, no? Just to practice. It's a free lesson, no? So the same applies to the other languages I have learned, and it will be a shame to forget, or to all the time I invested any energy into these languages to forget all of them. And another thing I would like to add about how I do that with our children. We never teach our children languages. We just try to be role models for them. We have noticed that they are learning faster by parroting us, by doing whatever we do. So if we want our children to learn Persian or Hindi now, we learn ourselves the language. And then they passively, and then later on actively, they will learn the language themselves.
There's something that you said there that actually is quite important, and this is having the courage to approach people that speak the language. Now, one of the things I don't think I've ever spoken about in a public way before is language etiquette. And for me, language etiquette is quite important. It's one of the language etiquette. So how to be polite. Yeah. And I think there is a language etiquette that exists that's unspoken, really, in certain places. And that's that using languages with people in a context. Let's take it, for example, as a native English speaker. Who here is native English speaker? Okay. So you may well more easily identify with this. If you're in an English-speaking country, your home country, and you see a foreigner and you speak their language, what do you default to? Generally, who would default to English? Let's say you speak Spanish and you're in America, in North America, in like either Canada or in the United States.
It depends on the city and the situation.
Okay, but if you go somewhere and you hear people speaking Spanish, would you necessarily just switch to Spanish if they know you're not a native speaker?
I would have to feel the context.
Okay.
I would speak Spanish probably.
You speak Spanish?
But it's hard for me to tell you the answer truthfully because I don't know
Okay.
the scenario. I have to feel what's happening.
My experience has been this. I'll share my experience because it may be a bit of a difficult question to put anyone on the spot about. My experience has been this. If somebody comes to my country to learn my language, I give them the general courtesy to speak my language to them. Because they've invested time, they've invested money, they've invested resources to come and learn my language. If I go to your country to learn your language, you should speak to me in your language. Even if I absolutely suck at the language. You should speak to me in it so that I improve. Because I'm investing time and money. I'm not a personal English language teacher. I'm happy if you want to practice English and you say, okay, you know, I've got no one to speak to, I really love your language. Do you mind if we speak English? I normally I'm fine with that completely. But if I've got 2 months of my time to go now to Poland, for example, to learn Polish, I don't want to go to Poland and just speak English. Because I may as well just be back somewhere else. I may as well go to the UK and see my mum. You know what I mean? So there is an etiquette involved, and I think that when I see opportunities like you say, living in the Balkans now is a really neutral environment. Because there is the etiquette then changes. If you're in a third country, where I've got Italian friends now in Macedonia, where we speak Italian every day, and they don't speak English well enough to be able to have a conversation anyway. But let's say they did, because we're in Macedonia, their language is not the local language. And so I feel that really it's more of an agreement between the two parties. If they want to practice the other one, or if you want to and you just agree and it's less formal. But I always think that the language etiquette thing is, for me, something that sometimes you, as a language learner, you want to just practice. But sometimes it can offend more than it can help.
I just want to make a note that the United States is a Spanish-speaking country. And so it's English and Spanish, and just so it really depends on where you're at. And if for example, in the example that you gave me, if people are speaking Spanish, it could also be extremely rude if I switch to English. So it's highly context dependent, and that could be completely different in another area of the country.
The reason I gave that example, thank you for your input, because your feedback is obviously, it's important to hear different experiences. The reason why I gave the example of the United States is because when I was over there, I heard the waiters speaking in Spanish. And I just naturally thought first language Spanish and thought, I'll speak in Spanish. The reaction I got from the American who was with me was, why did you do that? That's really rude. And because they could get offended. And I didn't even consider that as a thing, and that's why I ask, if you've had experience and what would you do in your countries? Because I don't know, generally it's one example of many. I will correct you and say that the United States is not a Spanish-speaking country. It's not got an official language. It actually has multiple languages.
I say that with understanding.
Oh, okay. Okay. Any other questions?
This is maybe like reversing the problem. I mean, when you help somebody like learning English, I think, what do you do? Like, what can people, for example, I'm in Lithuania now, I had a girlfriend, and I find it really hard to practice like with natives, because they kind of then, either they make it too easy, you know, or too hard, and they never find a sweet spot. So what's the advice that we could give to like natives in this case, you know, to really help somebody to practice? Because I want to practice, but I find it always hard to get it.
Yeah, that's a question I had recently. That is a very specific situation in a relationship. So who's been in that situation here? They're in a relationship and they want to learn the other language. Yeah? Not always easy, is it? And the reason for, I'm going to go on to other examples, but I'll start with the relationship because it was your situation, if you don't mind.
No, but it could be a friend. I mean,
yeah, it could be a friend. Okay. In general terms, I would say that you say, look, I appreciate that you're trying to help me in communication. This is a phrase that I trot out very regularly when I'm in a different country. Say, look, thank you so much for trying to make communication a lot easier by speaking my language. I really appreciate that. However, I really like your language and I want to improve it. And anyone that says no to that, you really shouldn't be talking to them anyway. Seriously, I mean, anyone that can say, I don't want you to speak my language in my country, ever. It's not a great situation to be in. Sometimes you may need to have, if you're a complete beginner, yeah, you can't have a friendship so easily if you're just speaking a language that you can barely say, how are you? But there needs to be some sort of agreement, I think, where maybe you agree, okay, on a Tuesday when we go to the pub, we will speak your language, and what I'd like from you, if you could just correct me, you know, maybe agree a limit of mistakes that you make. When you get to more intermediate level, if I make the same mistake 4 times and you hear me, and you hear that it's wrong, and I'm constantly saying it, then do correct me. But if you want a flow of conversation, sometimes correcting every single mistake is just the worst thing ever. So
reformulating.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I just want, sorry, can I just add one more thing about relationships? If it's a relationship, particularly a romantic relationship that you're in, and you're learning the language, get ready for some rough seas. Because one thing is learning a language, and the other thing is learning a language that you're going to use with your partner. Because you've got to get the nuances, and you've got to get them fast. Because they do not forgive you, and you'll be sleeping on the sofa. And that is a longer process, and you need, again, agreement. If you're in that sort of situation, you'll find that your partner is getting fed up, or it's causing arguments. I'd say, again, go to in the beginning stages of, let's agree a day when we speak your language, and you know, we'll make sort of some sort of agreement, because otherwise it won't go forward. And the best way to learn a language is at home. I'm not going to say in the bedroom, at home.
Just one more point about getting other people to speak to you in their language. Scandinavians are renowned for being very good at English, and it's true. You can almost not find anybody in Scandinavia who doesn't speak English. And if you're talking to them one-on-one, they will tend to speak English with you. But as soon as you get 3 Norwegians together, they'll speak Norwegian. They may start out speaking English to be polite, but they'll slip back into Norwegian in about 10 minutes' time. So going out with more than one person at a time is usually the way. They'll be talking their native language among themselves, and that way you're really exposed to it.
And I guess you're talking about friendship, so not polyamory. Or polyamory, polyglottery, polyamory, they're all polys. That's a really good piece of advice. Any of you free and singles out there? Open-minded, of course.
One thing, I had the case in Sweden. I wanted to learn Swedish, but you really have to be stubborn, and just once you told them, like, for the 5th time, please keep speaking in Swedish, I don't understand, but keep on, they do. And the other good one is say, I don't speak English in the language you're learning. That really works. They're like muzzle, like what? But then they say, okay, there's no other option. And about keeping languages, it takes me about 3 or 4 months a year traveling, so I really enjoy this part. That's a good way to do it. But if I don't, I just say, yeah, fuck it. It's like you said before, you have to choose the language you learn, and you have to choose according to your life. And if I've been living in Germany, I learned German here in the 6 months I was here. I left, and I spoke like 10 times German in 6 years. So I forget it, of course. But when I came back, I said, okay, I'm here, I practice. But I don't mind the fact that I have to start a bit in a lower level as my level I had when I was living here. I just have to pick it up again, and it doesn't matter. I think one big thing is, like, when you learn a language, whether it's like you want to learn 10 or just 2, it doesn't matter. It's just like, it's good. Like, even if you're like able just to order a kebab, that's good. It's like, be happy with what you have, accept that you lose it, and just accept that you will have to remember it, not relearn, but just remember it, like, from time to time, because that's it. Just accept that you're not perfect, that you will learn step by step, that you will forget. Because when you I think you said that earlier, but when you meet people and you speak their language, they're just happy, and that's like the present you have. And the time you feel like, okay, I can still speak German after 6 years with a lot of mistakes. Speaking half of it is Swedish now, but I still can communicate with people in their language. So I'm happy with that. And I'm really stubborn, as I said with Swedish, I really insist. And I'm stubborn because I keep on going to, I was in Turkey, I learned Turkish while I was there for 1 month, forgot everything, but I can still order a kebab. So every time I go, or falafel whatsoever, every time I go, I ask for it in Turkish. They answer, then they ask me, oh, where did you learn Turkish? Then I can understand, I explain, and then it goes on, and I don't understand everything, but I keep on. Every time I go, I just go, even if I don't understand, I keep on asking.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
In my home, I have different places where I put interesting list, and I don't speak about word list, but for example, list of proverbs of something I've loved in the language. And I practice a low intensity, which means that every day, just going through my home, here or there, I take a piece of paper and I get inspired, but with what is written on it. And I believe very much in the unaware learning. That means if I sing just a little song, it will keep going in my unawareness, and in that way I keep a low flame of all the languages, of the languages I don't use every day.
Yeah, thank you. I find songs useful as well. They're very good to sort of get back into things and listen, and and it's enjoyable as well.
I would say that maybe it's easier to retain a language the higher the level is that you've already reached. The question up front would be, would you agree? And why I think that is because if you want to speak to people and you ask them, can we please speak your native language? And you speak it well, then you're able to have a conversation in that language. But if you're a beginner, then it's going to be interesting maybe for some time, but at some point they get bored because it's very slow. I know that from myself. If somebody wants to speak with me in a language they don't master, and I still have to wait, and I know what they're gonna say, but it takes a long time, it gets boring. So it's natural, and it happens to other people as well. So for the conversation, it's easier if people have a higher level, and then maybe you can get to the level where you're comfortable speaking with one person, and they speak maybe not so well. They make it a little easier for you. But when you go out with several people and they speak the language among each other, you won't understand because they speak faster or they use other words. So I would argue that the higher the level is that you've already reached, the easier it is to retain the language because you have more possibilities using it sometimes.
I agree with you and I don't agree with you. I agree that you once you've got to a certain level, let's say a C1, C2 level in a language, and you've taken it to a quite advanced stage, that yes, the basic structures and things have been reinforced so many times that you're not likely to slip back right down to zero. So I completely agree. The thing where I'd say is that it can be frustrating when you've spoken a language to such a high level and you've had idiomatic expressions, you know proverbs, you know slang, you know really intricate words in the language that really were things that you used maybe on a daily basis at one time, and then now you can't. And you can feel a frustration from that. And I think you can lose that to a degree. In fact, I know people who have lost their native tongues to an awfully large degree. I know people, for example, we've got examples around the world when the Iron Curtain was up, they escaped and went to another country. And they didn't have any contact, no internet, no Skype. Things may change now with the advent of technology. But at that point, there are plenty of people around the world who have either lost almost completely, or they've gone to such a basic level in their native tongue, even that when they speak with natives, they change their way of speaking to accommodate them. I think when you get to a stage in language where native speakers are quite obviously not changing their way of speaking to you as they would to another native speaker, I think that's when you feel that great sense of satisfaction of you can take part in jokes, conversations, you can laugh, you can play on words, you can do all these great things that are really enjoyable. If you lose it then and you go away, I think it can be extremely frustrating, possibly more so than at the intermediate level if you lose it to a sort of a post-beginner's level. Does that make sense? Who had the hand? You had a hand.
Yeah, it's just more of a comment. I almost wouldn't give up the level I've attained in the one language that I've learned almost as well as English. For anything, the profundity, the cultural awareness, the knowledge, the idioms, I would give up learning other languages to keep reading a novel, always like every day a chapter in a novel in that language, or calling my friends in that country, or I would almost, because of my mindset, that's so hard won, that ultimate level of achievement where, yeah, my accent will never be completely native, but I'm so fluent and people will never second guess my ability. And yeah, it's so hard to give that up.
And that's one of the things that I think we see in the community. People debate what the relevance is of learning languages to an intermediate level, whether to learn lots of them to intermediate level, or whether to learn a couple to a really advanced level. And I think that there are awards in both endeavours. As somebody that's gone to those levels with some of my languages, I completely understand what you're saying, and I think that it's not nice then to lose that. And I think, especially if you like literature, a lot of people like literature and they read an awful lot of books in the language. Particularly, it's a hard loss to bear. And I agree that in that situation, if you feel that way, definitely it's good to keep up the other language instead of going to new ones if you feel that would be a time issue for you to be able to do both. My view on this, and I've reached this stage of questioning whether or not to take on new languages when I know that time is an issue, is that I decide that I'm going to keep some languages at the high level, and then I'm not so worried whether or not I've got basic Greek, and if one day I can take it to an intermediate level if I get the opportunity, great, but it's not the end of the world. But there's still value in knowing that basic level in the language, because you still get the same sense of achievement and feeling when you go and you speak to somebody in their tongue, whether it's a basic level or an advanced level. And that thing in your head, who feels the clicks in their head as they get to the certain levels? You go through the basic vocabulary, the basic grammar, and you start putting sentences together and explaining your thoughts. And you can get that in any language. And I think those endorphins, that motivation, that drive that creates is definitely worth it. Not parallel, not the same, but to getting to the level that we're talking about now of the near native level, but equally as satisfactory, I think, for the personal needs.
Sometimes I find that when you pick up a very easy language, it can actually be a Sudoku puzzle, so you can sort of relax from some of the harder languages that you're studying. And the purpose for me, anyway, is not necessarily to get very high in one of these easy languages, but to sort of to relax for a bit and get back at the harder work.
I like the Sudoku puzzle. That's what I say about Tokipona. Okay, it's ridiculously hot in here, and I can see people dropping like flies. So I think maybe... Are we done? I think we are, aren't we? Stick a fork in me, I'm done.